Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all. So welcome to another Sustainable Food Places campaigns breakfast. I ask everyone to please keep muted unless you're one of the speakers or you're asking a question to the speakers. Thank you very much. So my name is Sofia Parent. I'm a member of the Sustainable Food Places team at Sustain, and I'm hosting this meeting with my colleague Ren Piercy. Do you want to say good morning to everyone, Ren? Up to you.
Everyone, morning.
So welcome everyone. This is a space for campaign coordinators or partnership coordinators to come together to discuss current campaign developments, and we never shy away from any difficult issues. And that's why today we're talking about farmers and diets. We thought this was a really good session to host. We were challenged by Peter Sampson to organize something a few months ago, and that's why he'll be joining us a bit later today to host a panel with our speakers. So if you have any suggestions for sessions you would like us to host in the future, if you would like to be involved either organizing a session or hosting one, please be in touch with me and Ren. We're here to help all food partnerships. So today's session, planet-friendly diets won't ruin farmers. We thought this was a good one to host in January. We're past COP26, it's Veganuary, so can a transition to healthy, sustainable diets be possible? We think it is, and that's why we're hosting this session. We're going to bring you a few practical perspectives from farmers that are doing great things. We're bringing you a local perspective from a food partnership who is engaging with farmers. So we're going to start with 4 short presentations. The first presentation is from my colleague, James Woodward. He works at Sustain in the farming team, and he focuses on agroecology, agricultural policy and supply chains. He has worked for the National Farmers Union, England and Defra on various areas of farming policy and advice, as well as on his family's sheep and beef farm in Cumbria. Then we'll have 2 practical perspectives from farmers. The first one will come from Nikki Yoxall. She's a first-generation farmer based in northeast Scotland, where she and her husband run Grampian Graziers. She works with the Pasture Fed Livestock Association to support the links between academic research and farmers and members. Nikki is also a PhD student at the Countryside and Community Research Institute investigating the agroecological transition. And she sits on the board of Nature Scotland and the Nature Friendly Farming Network Scotland steering group. The second practical perspective from a farmer will come to us by Dan Birdit. He's a dairy farmer from West Sussex. So a nice geographical spread in terms of our practical examples. He is managing 2 organic herds, totaling 480 cows, and is supplying milk to McDonald's through Arla Co-op. He is passionate about increasing diversity on the farms and looking for ways to regenerate the soils. He recently finished his Nuffield Farming Scholarship entitled Regenerative Agriculture, How to Make Change Happen. Finally, we'll have a practical perspective from a food partnership. So Carolyn Bell, a food partnership coordinator from Food for Fife, the food partnership in Fife. And she will talk to us about the Fork to Farm dialogue that happened across Fife in the run-up to COP26. And this was one of over 15 dialogues that happened across the world aimed at bringing farmers together with cities or places, recognizing that these two deeply care about the future of our planet and climate change. And this is where I'll hand to Peter Sampson. He's food and growing coordinator and Food Durham, and he's also a smallholder producing Shetland hogget. So he will host your questions to our wonderful panel of speakers. So in the meanwhile, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. say where you're from, what you're drinking today. In the spirit of the campaign's breakfast, I'm drinking a cappuccino. So feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us where you're from, what you're drinking this morning. And this is where I'm passing on to James for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I will just share my screen and get some slides up. Is that okay? Is that coming up okay? Excellent.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, morning everybody, and thank you very much for having me along today. I've been given the task of trying to explain or try to set the scene of what better livestock might look like, and try to talk about some of the policies of how we could get there, and also some of the barriers as well. Before I kick off, I just want to say that there are two absolutely amazing farmers in Nikki and Dan here today who, this is their day-to-day life and their livelihood. So they will be much better placed to talk about what better looks like on a farm sort of scale and on the landscape scale and everything, but hopefully I can set the scene a little bit. So first of all, when I kind of think about better livestock, I try and put it in the frameworks or the concepts of agroecology and or regenerative agriculture, both of which I think have a lot of overlap and similarities in our sort of heading to the right future, as it were. But it's really trying to think about things holistically. So better livestock means better for the environment, so climate, nature, water quality, air quality, and the like. I think about better livestock farmers aiming to do the most they can for animal health and welfare, and they do that. Thinking about community and people, so those farmers being an integral part of the communities they're in, and being a place that's a people place, so being open and transparent to their local communities and providing opportunities for people to come and visit the farm and learn about farming and everything. Health and well-being, in terms of that, I'm thinking that meat and dairy as part of a balanced diet can provide lots of great health benefits for people, and also that the well-being aspects of farms, and there's some great examples out there where livestock-based farms are providing like on-farm land-based therapeutics type stuff as well, and that connection with people and animals is really critical there. Economic equity and resilience, so this is both in terms of better livestock farming being about farmers getting a fair price for what they're producing and being rewarded fairly for the public goods that they're delivering for the environment and for people, and also equity in terms of everybody having access to better livestock, meat and dairy products as well, and resilience in terms of those businesses being a lot more resilient to environmental economic type shocks. So I've tried to pull up some pictures that might visualize what better livestock kind of looks like, and they're by no means all kind of visualizations, and some of them might not be perfect, but I think as you can see in these photos, it's about diversity in the system. It's about livestock being outside as much as possible. I love the picture of the belted Galloways in the snow in the trees. It's about trying to keep livestock outside as much as possible so they can express natural behaviors. It's about interacting with livestock as farmers and as people, and yeah, about diversity in terms of the types of animals, the native species of grasses and flowers being in the system, and the use of herbal lays and all sorts of different practices that can fit under that. So I'm just quickly going to sort of try and visualize a bit the transition to agroecological farming in terms of better livestock. So really, I think, we need to have a vision and a plan so that for farmers at the farm level and for farmers and others in the community at the local landscape level of how to transition to agroecology from now up until 2030 and beyond. I think I'm really keen to see how we can all help facilitate peer-to-peer learning and creating an environment where farmers feel comfortable to take risks and make mistakes, because that's kind of, I think, how you can make progress is by not being too worried about making those mistakes, and having structures in place that can help farmers take those risks, but reduce those risks to them. So that's around making sure that any public or private finance, for example, can support better livestock. Really keen to see like a strategy for local food. So talking about like supply chains and routes to markets, matching the changes that farmers are doing. So those supportive markets are there to help farmers change to better livestock or to continue doing what they're doing if they are. really interested in this whole thing about like renewing our sense in culture and history when we're thinking about food and the land. And I think about countries like France, where I feel there's a much stronger sense of culture and identity with food, and that people are much more connected to food and farming and the land. And that's also thinking about food culture in terms of like culturally appropriate food for people as well. And finally, really need kind of like food and farming and the kind of drive towards better livestock and agroecology as a whole being a real kind of priority in terms of the political sphere of things as well, and making food and farming a key part of the whole kind of social justice movement that's going on at the moment. So some existing policies that could help us get there. So just briefly, the new environmental land management schemes, these are schemes that will pay farmers to take more sustainable farming actions or to do more kind of wholesale land use change. Those will be coming through over the next few years, and there's a question of will they support farmers to be more regenerative, more agroecological, and to be better, kind of fit into that better livestock side of things. We're hoping to see more of these supply chain codes of practice or codes of conduct come through to help tackle a lot of the unfair trading practices and the way that supply chains place farmers in that more kind of intensive conventional system and kind of don't help farmers get out of that paradox or that paradigm or whatever you want to call it. We've also got, as a lot of you probably know, these dynamic procurement pilots coming up. So really keen to see how procurement of food can support more better livestock farmers and more local, small and medium scale farmers doing that. There's going to be stuff around labelling coming through. And while I think labelling is important, I don't think it's the be all and end all, but I think it can help citizens when they're buying food understand better where their food comes from and how it's produced. And hopefully we can get to a future where there's a label that really clearly helps people make those decisions. And finally, we'll have the food strategy, the national food strategy recommendations coming through in a white paper, and there might be some legislative stuff coming through there, but what it might be, not quite sure yet. And then just quickly to sort of think about those policies and others and what I feel we need to do to get there as well. And this is both at a national and local government level, by the way. This and not just at government level, but just the policies that the sectors can take as well. But first off, I really think that we do need to rethink the whole environmental land management schemes at the moment. As they stand, I don't think they're really going to actually support farmers to change in a more wholesale way, but they could do, and they could be a really great way of getting a lot of farmers to change, because while there's some great pioneering farmers that will just leap forward and take those risks and make that progress, there's a lot that need that extra support. So I would like to see those schemes actually sort of rethought a bit so they support a more whole farm system approach. Local food systems, and talking about that earlier, I'd love to see that at the forefront of this whole levelling up agenda the government has got. And while I know levelling up is a bit of a meaningless jargon term that government uses, it is one that will have a lot of funding over the next few years, and it will be an important way of trying to level up those parts of the country which have been kind of left behind economically and culturally over the last few decades. And a lot of those areas happen to be rural areas. So food and farming should play a critical role in that. Really keen to see a food bill come through, which pulls together lots of different elements of policy, so that things around like mandatory standards in the way we procure food and the way that supply chains interact and things like that, so that farmers can access more markets and they can be on a fairer level playing field as well. And while there's lots of others that I would bring into this, one other I want to mention is I would love to see agroecology, regenerative food and farming really brought to the forefront of COP27 this year as well, and really around like support in those adaptation type funds and all the other areas, really helping farmers be able to do as much as they can to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and take examples of farmers like Nikki and what Nikki and Dan are doing to already do that. And finally, just to touch on some of the barriers, which some are more sort of structural and some are more like policy level. So I think there is an issue around at the moment, especially cost of living and low incomes, and really that's a more wide-scale structural one, which is harder to tackle, around people being able to access this food. And I think we really need that to be a critical part of this. We need to make sure that where public procurement is happening, that it's got the right budget so that it can actually support small, medium local farms. terms of there's this issue coming forward where trade policy is potentially actually going to undermine the undermine the food and farming and environmental standards that farmers have to meet. And it's also could potentially undermine the economic viability of a lot of British farming. And instead, I think trade policy needs to be better actually supporting a better future. I've already talked about the schemes being a bit too basic, and I would really like to see more complexity built into those, because a lot of this is about complexity. And also there's little coming through in terms of the change to the makeup of supply chains and routes to market. So yeah, those are some of the barriers. But just I wanted to very sort of finish on one point, which is I think livestock farming is absolutely critical to tackling the climate and nature emergency. I think it's also definitely can be part of a healthy, planet-friendly diet as well. And the examples that Nikki and Dan are going to give are really going to show how we can do that. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Great stuff. Great start to this meeting. And I'm really glad that in the many challenges that are there around why we're still not seeing better farming, vegetarianism or diets is not one of them. And I think that's a really important point as well. And thank you for keeping in time, because now we're going to hear from Nikki, our first practical example.
Thank you so much. And I think we're going to share.
Oh, the sound is not very good, Nikki. Nikki, I'm afraid I will have to stop you there because the sound is really terrible.
So now, and just want to say what a joy it is.
I think we've lost Nikki entirely.
No, I'm still here. Is that any better?
Oh, that's much better.
Okay.
I don't know what you've done, but it's much better. Thank you. So let's carry on. Let's carry on.
Great stuff. Well, yeah, so thanks so much for the invitation to come and speak. And I just want to say what a privilege it is to be mentioned in the same sentence as one of my farming heroes, which is Dan. So yeah, that's a really exciting opportunity to kind of share the platform with him today. But I will crack on as I only have 10 minutes. So thanks so much for the invitation. And I just want to introduce myself by saying I'm Nikki Yoxall, and I'll tell you a little bit about the context of what we do. But if you're interested in kind of following our journey, then you can find us on Twitter at How Mill, on Instagram at Grampian Graziers, and our website is there if you're interested in exploring further. So if you want to skip ahead, Sophia, to the next slide, that would be great. So just some context for you, and if you can just click through, that would be great. I think I've done something with the editing. So we're first generation farmers. We have 18 acres at home in Aberdeenshire on the River Devon. We have 100 additional acres through various licenses. That's great. Thanks, Sophia. Just leave it there for a second. 100 additional acres through various licenses and short-term arrangements, and with 400 more acres coming under management this year. We have 17 cattle, known collectively as the wee mob, but they're going to have to be less wee if we've got these additional acres coming to us this year. So we will be expanding the herd significantly. Our cattle are Shetlands and Galloways, so they are native, and the Shetlands are actually rare breed as well. And my husband and I both have interests in holistic management, which is the work of Alan Savory. I've just finishing my MSc in sustainable food and natural resources, and I'm doing a weird overlap starting my PhD as well, so quite busy. And I just wanted to say that I have sort of affiliations with all of those organizations on the right hand side. I do some work for Pasture for Life, as Sophia mentioned already, kind of engaging with research. The Nature Friendly Farming Network is a great organisation, and I sit on the Scotland steering group. I'm a member of the LWA, the Land Workers Alliance, and I'm planning to do some work with them this year around kind of livestock and how we look at like the role livestock play in agroecological transitions. I'm a Soil Association Farmer Ambassador and sit on the Soil Association Growers Board, and I am also on the board of NatureScot. So I'm really lucky to have all these opportunities to kind of engage with different stakeholders across the sector. Okay, next slide. And if you could just click through, brilliant. So a little bit about what it's like, and I noticed that we do have participants from Scotland, so they'll know what challenges we have here in the northeast, but we're at 57 degrees north. Winter generally kind of sits at -7. No, it's been particularly mild this year. Last year, we went down to -20 for about a week on the farm. That was pretty hard going. It can get pretty windy. We're very close to the Cairngorm National Park. We don't really have any barns or sheds on the farm. We just have a small byre, which isn't suitable for animals. Of our 18 acres, 8 to 9 of that is native woodland, native broadleaf woodland. And we are considered to be a less favoured area. So it's considered to be fairly marginal grazing. But if you look at that photo, I mean, that's, to me, looks fairly abundant. So how we classify our land is something that interests me. We have very diverse native swards on the farm. And some of the ground can be pretty wet. You can see the River Devon just in the background of that photo. So we do sit just above the river. Our cattle are viewed by us as ecosystem engineers. So they help us to shape the landscapes within which they inhabit and contribute to ecological functioning. They're small, very hardy native cattle, as I've already said, and we use them in our role as graziers on other people's land. Using holistic management, we put forward our 3 kind of key aims of our holistic context, which are diversity, abundance, and nourishment. And those are the things that we really frame all of our work around. How can we create diversity? How do we create abundance? And how can we nourish ourselves, the land, and our community? And our kind of method of how we our business model, if you like, is through direct sales. So we used to do direct sales all across the UK, but actually realized that our holistic goals really align us with our local community. So we've stopped selling nationwide, and we would rather, if somebody from Norfolk or South Wales gets in touch and says, I'd like to buy your beef, instead we actually suggest and recommend that they shop more locally and direct them to other farms that we know of through the pasture, through Pasture for Life. So we've really focused very locally on our local community and trying to build up a reputation with our neighbours to understand the benefits of 100% pasture and tree-fed beef. Okay, next slide. I'm going to have to talk quickly because I think I'm cracking on through my time here. Is it skipping on, Sophia? So, oh yeah, brilliant. So it was just to put in context that we are at a critical time within a climate change and biodiversity crisis, as well as a health crisis. And you know, all of these amazing organisations coming forward to say we have to address this. And so the way that we see that, I think you've just skipped. Oh, back to the one with the cow, if possible, please. So the next slide up there, perfect. So to address these issues, we want to really see these kind of landscapes of the future that are integrated, that are diverse, that are abundant, that are closed loop, that are resilient to climate change, and that give us healthy food and engage with our communities. And I thought there were some really great things that came out of Farming 1.5 Degrees, which was a Scottish collective that came together to kind of explore some of these issues. And they really identified that better soil management to drive biological activity is going to create that foundation for increased biodiversity above ground, that high nature value grazing systems have a strong role to play, and that we can prioritise rebuilding biodiversity alongside targeting greenhouse gas reductions and sequestration, and that these innovative approaches to multifunctional land use such as agroforestry are really going to add value across a range of priorities. And I really see them not adding value just to the ecology, but also to us from a business point of view. Because I think this is, you know, the idea of these conversations is that, you know, lots of people will say you can't be in the green if you're not in the black. But for us, we cannot be in the black if we're not working to a green agenda. Everything that we do is based around ecological functioning and the ecosystem of the farm. And those are the things that are actually enabling us to be profitable. So next slide. The number one aspect of our farming practice that enables us to be profitable, I would say, is agroforestry. So this is the intentional integration of woodland and farming. And in our case, that would be known as silvopastoral. So that's where you integrate livestock and woodlands. And you can see in these images that actually the woodland plays a really important role in the summer for shade. And we're getting warmer and hotter summers, even up here in northeast of Scotland. It plays a really important role in the winter as well in terms of shelter. And the nutrient value means that we don't have to buy in additional minerals. So we don't have any of those kind of plastic lick tubs knocking about the farm anywhere. We're not having to supplement our cattle with any other sorts of concentrate feed or grain. Everything that they eat grows on the farm, either trees or grasses or leafy herbs in the sward. And we do buy in a bit of hay, but we're taking on more land. We're hopefully going to be able to make our own species-rich hay going forwards. But this integration of trees and cattle or sheep, once you see an animal reaching its head up to eat leaves off the tree and to browse, you'll suddenly realise, actually, this is where cows are meant to be. They just look so perfect in the woodland. And it does offer the additional benefits of increased biodiversity, increased carbon sequestration potential, and it really is, I say, in the uplands, one of the only ways that we can really increase carbon sequestration whilst farming and producing beef would be through an agroforestry system. Okay, next slide. We outwinter our cattle, so you can see here, this was last winter when we went down to -18, I think, the thermometer at the top there. But these super hardy, amazing cows are just absolutely brilliant outside all year round. The bottom left photo, you can see it's quite kind of scrubby grass, but our cows really thrive on that. And we also want to make sure that, you know, they are maintaining condition. So we'll add some hay into the mix, like you can see in the bottom middle, when there is too much snow on the ground and they can't reach the grass underneath. But it reduces the risk of sort of any lung problems and respiratory issues that you get when animals are housed. And you can just see that the cows really are quite content when they're outside. And actually, because of the way the rumen works, the cows are working to keep themselves cool until we're well below 0. So it doesn't affect them like it does us. I'm going to just skip quickly on because I think I'm running out of time, but the next thing I wanted to talk about was the efficient conversion of native flora. So this is something, again, in terms of how do we get the most without having to have inputs. We're not ploughing the land, we're not reseeding. I can't, it's kind of not gone, it's knocked out of presentation mode, Sophia, so I don't know if the next slide is available, but I think the screen share is still showing out wintering. But if you could go on to the next one, that would be great. But I'll talk through it as you're trying to get there. So this idea that using the types of cattle that we do, they're able to put on weight, be healthy and thrive, even though they are on what might be considered by some to be pretty rough grazing. But you can see there's excellent flowers available for pollinators to share that ground. We try as hard as we can to, by implementing mob grazing, to leave quite a lot of residual behind, and it's all about creating habitat for different plant and animal species. And then just moving on, the next slide just shows you a bit of a close-up, some of those plants and creatures that we share our ground with. And these are all things that we'll see in abundance across the farm that really do play a role in addressing the biodiversity loss emergency that we find ourselves in. And every little thing that we can do to try and create more of this abundance and more of this diversity is absolutely, as I said, front and centre of our plans. So just to finish, a final slide, and I think I'm only 1 minute over at this point, to kind of say that native breeds really can contribute to efficient and profitable farms without the need for mined minerals, winter housing or concentrate feed. So for our point of view, we really do feel that this model enables us to be profitable, to produce what I consider to be some of the best beef I've ever eaten, though I would say that, without having to rely on those extra inputs. And these animals really are intrinsically linked to the land. So this idea of place is really important. They're perfectly adapted to the terrain, the climate, the soil and plant life. And we like to think of these kind of contextual attributes giving the le terroir that the French would use to describe that same relationships in crops and particularly wine. So these animals are very much of the place. And because of that, this idea of kind of localism, community, and nourishing our local community whilst enabling ecological functioning is absolutely what we're all about. So I will finish there. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for sharing the slides. Really appreciate it, Sophia.
No, thank you very much, Nikki. It was really inspirational, and I think you've allowed us to travel to your bit of the world, which was great. And I loved the expression you used to describe your cattle as ecosystems engineers. I think that will stay with me, as I'm sure it will stay with many of the participants today. So just a reminder, if you have any questions for our wonderful speakers, do pop them in the chat, because we'll pick that up when we go to the panel discussion later. In the meanwhile, we're going to hear from Dan, our second practical example. And I'm going to share his presentation as well, and I hope I do a better job this time.
Morning, everybody. It's going to be a tough act to follow, Nikki, but it'll highlight the differences and the challenges in the farming systems, I guess, that we both operate in. And I guess so as dairy farmers, we're probably more on the intensive scale of things, perhaps than Nikki is, and therefore that reflects some of our farming practices, but also it shouldn't really hinder what we're trying to achieve. So I'll have a chat through that. Thanks, Sophia. So just a bit of background. Yeah, so we farm here at home. I farm with my dad down in West Sussex. We have 240 cows that calve in the autumn on the farm that we own, half of it, and we rent in the rest of it. So we run about 700 acres here at home. And then a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to take on another dairy farm in Kent. So a similar size, about another 700 acres, organic farm over there. We now autumn calve over there as well. So about 480 cows, all doing the same thing at the same time of year. So we get lots of efficiencies by calving all our cows in a 6-week block. So we have lots of busy times. We also have lots of quiet times. So it's good for the people involved in the business and for me and my family. We try and graze as much as possible. So here at home, from February through to November, we'll have cows out, not necessarily all day, but for part of the day on the shoulders of the season. And they're housed over winter. We produce majority of our milk through the winter period. It's when we get incentivized to produce it. It's when the market demands our milk is produced. So again, that's a sort of a point of debate we can perhaps have later. We try and keep our systems as simple as possible. So they're on mainly self-feed silage. So the cows go to the food rather than the food being delivered to them. We have 5 full-time plus me. So we have 2 full-time on each farm plus some students help. And all our milk, majority goes to McDonald's via our co-op Arla, and I'll talk a bit about them in a minute. And a bit like Nikki, really, we're driven really here by soil health and diversity above and below ground. If we can achieve that, we know that eventually it will lead to greater profitability going forwards. Thanks, Sophia. So just a bit about Arla, as we're talking about the food market here. So it's owned by just over 9,500 farmers across Europe, predominantly Scandinavia, Germany and the UK. We're the largest dairy processor in the UK, and it's very much driven by brands. So many of you will have heard of Lurpak and Anchor and Cravendale, Skyr yogurts, things like that. Also in the organic world, so Yo Valley, everything other than yogurt is now under the Arla umbrella as well. So it's trying to create as much value for its owners as possible, because the simple red, blue and green pint of milk in the shop has a zero value to us, really. It's a loss leader, unfortunately, still in supermarkets, and the only way to really drive growth for us as farmers is to add value by branding them. Yeah, so it's very much the retailers that are driving what we need to do. So we now have to jump over a number of hurdles, go through lots of hoops. So that would be biodiversity checks, that's on-farm animal health checks, and that's climate checks. And all that data is used to feed back into retailers to tell the story of the farmers. So whether we're carbon neutral, whether we're increasing biodiversity on our farms, or whether the health of our herds is increasing. So it's very much a retailer-driven market. And And Arla now is really looking abroad to expand markets, particularly in West Africa, in the Middle East, and particularly in Asia, where dairy demand is skyrocketing still. There's no such thing as veganuary in any of those countries. Veganism is not a thing in any of those countries. And so very much in the future, the UK will be looking at increasing processing facilities to be able to drive growth into those markets. Thanks, Sophia. So what drives us here at Cockhays? So I think I mentioned it. So diversity would be the big one for me. We started planting, so but unlike Nikki, we don't have, well, we do have some native pasture here, but most of it is in a rotation system. So we plant most of our grasses. So we started planting herbal lays, mixed swards. So we have a variety of grasses, variety of herbs, and a variety of legumes that are in those lays. So they're deep, some of them are deeper rooting, it gives us some drought tolerance. Some of them are better for dry weather as well. So grasses like cocksfoot do better down here in the very dry southeast, particularly in the last few years. And we found that we've increased production overall, and it just got me interested in, why that is. And so I guess we're trying to mimic nature. I guess whereas Nikki will be doing it just by the grazing, we will be trying to force it a bit quicker by planting these plants into our pasture. As you see there, we've also just come off the first year of planting trees into one of our paddocks. We're going to try and expand that going forwards to try and bring some different fungal growth into our soils and provide shade and shelter, much like Nikki's looking at doing there, but with dairy cows instead of beef cows. We've also trialed in the last year running a group of chickens behind. It's been a real challenge. It's the guys who work for me who are running this. It's their kind of pet project, and we've supported them in doing it. But it's very, very hard to make a living out of 100 chickens. And now we've got avian flu every winter. They've found that in the winter months, the chickens don't produce eggs when they're housed. So we've got lots of challenges trying to maintain that diversity. Thanks, Sophia. So what drives us is simplicity. So we try and use as little machinery as possible, as few tractors, try and let the cows do some of the work for us. We shouldn't be working for them, the saying goes, they should be working for us. So we try and have animals out as much as possible. Our calves are reared outside until it gets too wet in December on simple systems, but they learn to graze as calves. So whereas with Nikki, they would be on their mothers, in ours, those calves are in groups of 40, and they learn together as a group rather than through their parents. Thanks, Sophia. And mainly profit. And sometimes it's seen as a kind of the word that shouldn't be said in farming, but we need to make a profit. Some of that will come through the biodiversity for sure. The soil health will allow us to become more consistently profitable during years like 2 years ago, where we didn't have any rain for 8 months, and we really, really struggled. And so we have to make our soils more resilient in order to keep growing grass. Without growing grass, we can't make a profit. The milk price has recently gone up, and it's reflected the pressures that we're all under as well. And so we need to continually push retailers to make sure that farmers are profitable. Thank you. So what are the challenges going forwards? I mean, James touched a bit on it, on the new regulations that are coming in. There's been a bit more clarity this week, but as a farmer, I'm still pretty unsure what it really means to me. I'm going to be losing BPS, the subsidy payments, which is fine, but I'm not quite sure what it's going to be replaced with and what I'm going to have to do. As an organic farmer, we're probably going to tick quite a lot of boxes already, which is good for us. Climate change is massive. I've been farming for 13 years, and the last 5 years have been a real roller coaster, like up and down, never know what we're going to get each year. And that's cost us a lot of money, particularly buying in food. As I mentioned earlier, cheap food is still a huge issue. Most supermarkets lead on cheap, everyday value, etc. Until we get away from that mindset, farmers are always going to be bottom of the pile when we're selling into that sort of market. Understanding carbon and biodiversity. There's a lot of talk about farmers selling into the carbon market and biodiversity credits. I'm very skeptical about it at the moment. I'm really not sure. There's no regulation around it, and I'm not sure that farmers are fully prepared for what's going to be coming and who's going to be knocking on their door. People is a massive issue when trying to employ people. Now, finding the right people and keeping them for any length of time, we have to work really hard. We have to pay them very, very well, and we have to make sure that they get everything that they want. And outside pressures, so pressure groups, government, veganism, etc. You know, it's there every day, knocking on our door. It's either there. We've had people on the farm damaging our equipment. We've had neighbouring farms where people have had their sheds broken into, etc. So there's always pressure from other groups. Thanks, Sophia. But there's lots of opportunities. We're going to start making cheese here this year. We're going to partner up with a couple are moving out of London. So we're going to try and tap into the local food market. And I think that would be a really good opportunity for us to expand into that. We probably have close to 200,000 people within about 15 minutes of the farm. So that's a huge opportunity for us, bringing communities closer to us, volunteer groups, school kids, youth groups, etc. I'm really keen on all of that. We always want to provide opportunities to bring others into farming, so others who haven't had the opportunities that I've had to work with them. Have a better understanding. Every day we're getting a better understanding of the ecosystems around us. We'll never get there completely, but we're getting there. And also to work closely with other farmers. We've started a couple of cluster groups, and that will be a big thing going forward to bring about larger scale landscape change. Thanks, Sophia. Just very briefly, so we need a lot of data on our farms. We need to tell our stories, and we need to have facts. Sorry, I had to go through the whole thing. We need facts and figures because we need to back up what we're saying. It's very good for me to say, I can tell lots of anecdotal stories, but we need the data on farm. It's really important that we tell our story with pride. Nikki's a great example of reaching out to communities, both locally and nationally. And as farmers, we need to be there at the forefront of this. But also we need to have empathy and understanding when being challenged by others and not become too defensive. I think that's me.
Thank you, Dan, for another really inspirational presentation and a good reminder of the importance of managing careful everything above and below ground, and also that climate change is already having an impact on farmers in the UK. We sometimes think about the impacts of climate change being somewhere else, far away, in drought-prone areas, but a good reminder that it's having an impact on farmers here. And your example of 8 months without rain is extreme, but it's being felt. So next, I would like to invite Carolyn to give us a practical example from a food partnership working with farmers locally. And Carolyn, her team produced a wonderful film that we're going to show at the end of the meeting today. We plan to finish at 11:15, so do stick around for this film, which is really good.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Hello, everybody, and thanks for inviting us. I'm Carolyn. I work for Fife Council, and we're based in Fife. I'm part of the Climate Change Zero Waste team. Sophia, are you able? Oh, brilliant. If you could go to the next slide, please. And the next, yeah, that one. So if there are other food coordinators in the audience here today, you'll recognize the 6 pillars. I've put together this diagram really to sort of share with my colleagues at the council and also with farmers and other food businesses, so that they could sort of recognize where they sit within the relationship that we're trying to build in Fife to create our food strategy. So I'm the food coordinator for the Food Partnership and Strategy in Fife. And so last year, it was my role to bring people together and to establish the partnership. And so we looked at what kind of people did we want to be working with to do this. And so it was really helpful. Sustainable Food Places really helped us to sort of have this kind of diagram to move forward with. So today I'm here to talk about our work with farmers, which sit in the Food for the Planet pillar, and our relationship with them and how we've linked them into the partnership and working with our economic development teams and our catering and procurement teams. Next slide, please. So before I was able, because farmers don't normally come and talk to councils, so we had to sort of find our way to do that, and I really wanted to sort of set up the opportunity for procurement so that farmers would have the opportunity of a different market to come into and work with councils. So as I mentioned before, we got funding at sort of end of January, beginning of February last year to set up the food partnership and to put the food strategy in place. And I then worked with my colleagues. We have two departments at the Fife Council. We have catering and that deliver to the school meals, and then we have procurement, and they're different departments. And then we have economic development, and they work with a lot of food businesses. So we brought all these teams together as part of this project. And we also set up a Fife-wide procurement team, which included the NHS and St Andrews University and colleges in Fife. So next slide. So that's really a little bit of a background to what we were doing. And during that time when we were setting up all the working groups and bringing people together to be in the partnership, I was working, I was researching different farmers and going out and meeting them at their farms and building relationships. And we had a food vision workshop, and we also had a food summit in the summer of 2021, and we invited the farmers to come and work with us. We wanted really for people to be able to come and sort of set up a group that would advise on the food partnership, and farmers are really, really busy. And so Nourish Scotland were really helpful. Pete Ritchie, I'd met him at a number of conferences, said, please come and help us. We're doing this in Fife. And so Pete put us in contact with some farmers, and we've also got economic development, have also set up a food business network. So we were able to sort of talk to and contact a lot of farmers through that network as well. Our first Fork to Farm dialogues, which was a dialogue that's been happening that Nourish Scotland has set up, as Sophia mentioned earlier on, was with farmers from all around the world, and they were meeting at COP26. And so we set up our Fork to Farm dialogues in August last year. Because farmers are really busy, we had 1 hour a month, basically, where we listened to the ideas and requests from the farmers. I mean, they're businessmen. We need to actually not waste their time having a talking shop. So the ideas around that came out of those 3 meetings were about how do we create new markets for their produce, and how do we support climate friendly produced food. Our food strategy is part of our climate action plan, and so we're very aware that of the climate footprint that food creates, and how can we support our farmers in Fife. So Nourish helped us facilitate those meetings. We also brought in National Farmers Union members from that, and as I mentioned before, economic development that can help with funding for different projects, and procurement as well, so that they could actually meet farmers. A lot of fears around changing the way procurement happens is because we've got to have a delivery of food for kids to eat. If you meet farmers, you know, our procurement team meeting up with the farmers and building relationships and building trust there to see how it could possibly be done differently has been really useful. We really wanted to reflect the conversations that we were having. And so again, our farmers have been absolutely brilliant. They agreed to be interviewed and to sort of talk about the issues that they were facing and what they would like and the links to climate change. And that film we took to COP26 and we showed it at Nourish Scotland's exhibition, and we took questions from farmers from all over the world. So 2 of our farmers came with us to COP26 and sort of helped answer questions from different people from around the world. And next film. So out of those 3 meetings, we've got a number of projects that we're working on. These are the 2 main ones I'm going to share today, which is the Glen Pavilion is one of our main event places that does weddings and conferences, and it also has a cafe. So we're going to look to provide all the food that's needed at this place from local sources. So in the timetable for that is January to March. We're looking to set that up. April to June we'll be trialing all the meats from local farms. July and August we'll be trialing salads, and September to November we'll be trialing seasonal veg, and then we'll do a report on how we did with that, costs as well as distribution. Next slide, please. And the second project is a school meals project. We have, not all schools have kitchens. We have 4 pilot schools in Fife that provide meals for 18 other primary schools. So in total, sort of providing 1,000 meals per day. So we're looking to set that up in March, working between March and June, and sort of working with staff, taking them on visits to the farms, putting them, giving them capacity building around climate literacy and around the links with food and climate, and looking to set up the supply of climate friendly meat from August to December with a report in December. We've also got other pilots that looking in the pipeline will be our daycare centres as well. And then with the schools pilot, we'll also then be looking at other vegetables and salads and fruit that we can sort of buy locally. Next slide, please. So Food for Fife, we've got a website, and those are the links to the film, and that's my contact details. But really the work that we've been doing with our farmers, I mean, we're so proud of our farmers. It's been a fantastic project to work on, to sort of work together, and also for the farmers to work together too. And all of them were really proud of the film that we made. So I really look forward to you. They're the ones that are sort of speaking about it rather than me. I'm just kind of introducing our farmers to you. We've got a small group, the Fork to Farm Dialogues is a small group at the moment. We'll be expanding it, and we're advertising through the National Farmers Union website for people to come and join the group and join some of these projects and open up those markets to more local produce. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening, and hand over to you, Sophia.
No, thank you very much, Carolyn, for sharing that. Really, really inspirational. And I look forward to see the outcome of those pilots. But this is actually where I hand over to Peter, who is going to chair a panel discussion. So I hope you've been thinking of questions for our speakers. Please pop them in the chat, and Peter will pick them up. So Peter, feel free to unmute, come in, introduce yourself, and start questions to speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There's so much to unpack in these few presentations. I think part of my frustration earlier last year was about the lack of connection between farming and food partnerships. There's an awful lot of thinking and action going on in food partnerships across the SFP network, but certainly for us in County Durham, where I've been mainly working for the past past 7 years nearly, the connection between people who do the farming and the wider food partnership has been pretty poor. And I think it's sort of hinted at in one of the things that Dan mentioned about empathy and understanding of others and other people's point of view. You mentioned dialogues between people who produce food and people who are pushing for a better food system are absolutely essential in our world, I think. So if we can start a little bit of that through the Sustainable Food Places network, I think that would be a really good outcome for this session and any other food partnership in that respect. I've got a quick question for Carolyn, and you mentioned your school meals provision. Who provides the school meals in Fife? Is that the schools themselves, or is that as in-house, or have you got a third-party provider?
No, Fife Council coordinate and organise the food, and we have a lot of schools still have kitchens and kitchen staff. I think this is the problem of getting local food into local schools, is they don't have dirty rooms. You know, they don't store dirty carrots or dirty potatoes. I don't think very many schools peel potatoes anymore. You don't pay staff to peel potatoes. You get peeled or chipped potatoes and processed potatoes direct to the school. And the same for chicken. There's a lot of issues around, you know, food poisoning with chicken. So chicken comes in processed. We're lucky in Fife in that a number of our farms also have their own butcheries. So we can have, you know, we're working with those farms to actually deliver us the meat that we're going to need for our schools. And that's why we're running the pilots, so that we can process that food locally and actually deliver it to our local school children. But yeah, there is an issue with school kitchens these days. Everything was to do with efficiency, but a lot of kitchens still really want to be able to use their skills, and if we can do that with local food, then that's brilliant.
In County Durham, we have quite a lot of school kitchens, but most of the school meals are provided by a third-party provider. So it's one contract between the county council and the provider, which in our case is Elior, and they're quite willing, but in essence we have to influence the county council to change or to improve the contract, rather than doing things with school kitchens direct. Just moving on. Bella early on asked about the linkage with the cost of living crisis, and was wondering whether there are any alliances between groups that work on welfare reform, living wage and such like, and agroecological land management. Now, that's a question I don't really know the answer to. I mean, are there such alliances? James, Nikki, yeah, fire away.
Well, I guess the first place to go to for those kind of conversations would be the Land Workers Alliance, who promote agroecology and are working really closely with a range of other organisations to focus on workers' rights within agriculture. So not just farmers, but the people that work within agriculture, and also thinking about campaigning for things like universal basic income and other kind of more social aspects of agroecology. So definitely Land Workers Alliance, and there are also some really great groups coming together. Like in Scotland, we have the Good Food Nation bill, which has gone through recently, and that has been really promoted by the Scottish Food Coalition, who are made up of a whole group of different organisations linked primarily to food, but also include unions, include other groups of organisations that are particularly focused on welfare of particularly protected groups, for example. So yeah, there's definitely work happening in that space, but it might be quite local, which is probably a good thing.
I think it's a slight side issue, but it's worth reminding people that a lot of the land management type policy, not almost all of the land management type policy, is devolved matter. So things in Scotland are different from things in England and things in Wales. And depending on where you are, those will have different ways of expressing themselves. And being based in England, I sometimes look over the border into Scotland with a certain amount of jealousy, because it seems to be more connected up. But hey, I'm saying nothing more than that. Anyone else who wants to add about that link between sort of welfare reform, living wage, and agroecology? Is there anyone else who wants to come in on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to just quickly come in, and as Nikki said, there are a lot of organisations and alliances who are doing that, and Sustain, we work closely with the Land Workers Alliance on that stuff as well. But I think that some of the things that need tackling to address those things are really difficult to tackle. And for example, Dan was talking about cheap food, and when you try and look at the flow of money between in that sort of supermarket supply chain, a lot of it sort of tends to get siphoned off and goes to shareholders and goes elsewhere. So there's money there to make sure that farmers are paid fairly and that food remains affordable in that system. But I think we do really need to look at opportunities to relocalize food a bit as well. And there's lots of examples of farmers who are they're trying and they're experimenting different ways to try and make sure that their agroecologically produced food is affordable for all people. So I know lots of farmers are trying out different solidarity type schemes, for example, as well as making sure that they're paying, as Dan was saying, making sure that they pay their staff well and things like that. So there's lots of stuff happening. It's just trying to tackle some of those big issues is quite a difficult thing to do. But yeah, there's lots of good stuff happening, and hopefully that chips away at it.
Then there's a question from Adrian. You're in York, aren't you? About the vegan question. Saying how can animal welfare include killing livestock? As a small scale producer of sheep meat, I'm one of those people who struggles with that. But I'm interested to hear from Nikki and Dan how you view these things, and whether you've had those conversations with people around your farm and in your communities.
Dan, do you want to take this one first?
I guess for us, it's probably more applicable, the removal of calves from cows. When we have groups, I think the issue, no one's actually directly asked that question in a negative way before, because those people don't tend to want to come onto the farm to initiate dialogue. But I get a lot of people asking out of interest about it. And we always talk about, well, we keep the calves together as groups. They're grouped up, they're in social hierarchies within the groups, etc., and they're close to their mums. I think, if people want to have dairy on a big scale, then that needs to happen. We can have cow-calf systems, but in reality, the separating cows from calves, I think most people understand that if they like dairy produce. The meat thing's difficult. I think most farmers would have a fair degree of empathy. Sending off animals to slaughter is not the favourite day of the year, and there is certainly quite a lot of compassion for it. Obviously, the fewer animals, Nikki would probably understand. The fewer animals you've got, the closer you become to them, you become attached to them. But we are omnivores at the end of the day. Like, we are designed to eat meat. We always have done. People have, for millions of years, have killed animals in order to provide nutrition. So we're only extending that. I think the issue is with industrial scale farming and slaughter. And I think trying to, differentiate the two is quite important, that farmers try and get that message across.
Yeah, I'll add to that by saying that I have far more, this is a very personal view, but I have far more respect for somebody who's vegan or vegetarian because they don't like the idea of killing animals than a meat eater who doesn't like the idea of killing animals and so gets squeamish and says, don't tell me about the death of the animals, but they'll quite happily buy steak. I think everybody has the right to choose their own diet, and I would always challenge somebody who says that they are vegan for climate and environmental reasons, because I think that there is such a we have such a need for ruminant livestock, or ruminants just generally, in maintaining really healthy ecosystems. And when you start just looking at emissions and you discounting fossil fuels, this is a huge kind of area to start going into. So I'll avoid that rabbit hole. But I think the key thing, as as Dan said, is that it's really hard when and when I take, do you want to know who this was, or do you want to, keep that anonymity? How much do you want to know about the animal? And most of our customers say, oh no, who was this? Tell me about their life. So I think if, it really is down to individuals, and what we would love is to be able to slaughter on farm. We would love that we don't have to put our animals in a trailer, and that we don't have to drive 2 hours, to the nearest best abattoir. We drive past an abattoir because we don't think they're any good. We drive a bit further and we make that trade-off between time in the trailer and a better experience at the point of killing, at the point of slaughter. So we make those judgments, we make those decisions, and I suppose if people don't want to eat meat or have dairy because they don't agree that killing is something that needs to happen, then that's fine. They don't need to, that's their choice. But I would always challenge people around the processed food that they eat, and I think that's far more an important thing to focus on. And would always talk about the Michael Pollan approach, which is to eat real food, mostly plants, not too much. And if people can kind of take that route in terms of their dietary choices, I think we're probably onto a much healthier human population and healthier ecosystems.
I also have a personal perspective because my 10-year-old daughter has decided not to eat any beef that comes from the farm now. So, because she's grown up and she's known that calf, and she really struggles with it. And so I get it. It's like, and that's totally her opinion. And she actually wants to become a dairy farmer, like she wants to be the farmer. But yeah, so I understand, and that's from a farm child, so kids growing up in the towns and the cities, it's a hard one. Yeah.
I find it increasingly difficult to do the job, as in to take my animals to the abattoir, but I see it as my responsibility in our small farm practice to make sure that the animals that you've cared for in our case about sort of 18 months or so, and you've done the very best to give them a good life, to make sure that they've been able to express themselves naturally, that they have in essence done their job, to also make sure that the end is as good as you can make it. And the results and the feedback that we get from our customers, be it a relatively small number, is really, really good. I mean, people who buy our hoggets don't really want to buy anyone else's. So there is an element there of being realistic in what happens, but at the same time recognizing that what you've done is really humane in inverted commas process. We've done it as best we can. We're ending or heading towards our 11:15.
Sorry, Peter, can I just quickly add? Can I just quickly add something to that question? Because just very, very quickly to say that it's a really the one thing that I think we all need to try and think about as well is, if we were to remove livestock from our landscapes and our farms, we have no idea what impact that would have on biodiversity and on soil health. And what we get from livestock in terms of grazing and manure and things are a critical part of being able to having healthy soils and being able to manage semi-natural habitats that we have in the UK, like Nikki does on her farm, and even down with the herbal lays, it's providing a lot of biodiversity value. And I think if we were to just remove things, we don't understand what impacts that might actually have, those unintended consequences. I think it's really important to not just do something because it's like a reactionary thing. I think it's really important that we understand those things and recognize that it's not just black and white, it's not just this or that, and that there's a lot of nuance in this. And I think it's critical that we create more spaces for dialogues as well, rather than just seeing things on social media and things like that, but we actually create space for that dialogue to happen, so that people can have those conversations and not just see a headline and think, oh, livestock is bad because I've seen that headline that says it does this or that or the other. Yeah.
There are two more questions in the chat, and then I think we do need to sort of give time for the film. And I'm going to take the last one first, Natasha's question about menus in London showing retired dairy cow beef on them. How does this fit into the picture? is it an extremely niche, or is it a new market? Dan, what's your view on that?
I think it's, well, at the price they charge, it's always going to be niche. Yeah, I mean, some of the best beef comes out of dairy herds, for sure, but they're talking about keeping cows for 3 or 4 years, and so that's a cow doing nothing for 4 years is very expensive. Yeah.
And then finally, there's a question from Louise about language to use when talking to farmers, and it sort of hints at the defensiveness of the farming industry. If you follow any farmers on social media, you'll have spotted it. I mean, it's all over farming social media, the issue around language and how people feel. And I think it comes to the core of what this session perhaps can begin to address. What sort of language should we be using to make sure that there is respect across the different worlds? I think that's the way Louise phrases it is to say there's real sensitivity in coming to terms, in using terms like climate friendly as an implied assumption that people are being irresponsible and damaging. Views?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that what most farmers really get frustrated about is that we are on a daily basis looking at very holistic systems. And what I personally get frustrated about is when people want to talk to me about very focused and kind of reductive issues like emissions or animal welfare. And actually the holism of the system, I guess we're all very used to being in that. And there's a risk there that farmers are so used to dealing with this complexity on a daily basis that they then, when faced with a more reductive viewpoint, can become quite frustrated. So we definitely have a role to play in listening and engaging with conversations and working really hard to not become defensive. But I guess that's one really key thing, is that, you know, climate friendly generally relates to emissions. But actually, it's much, much broader than that. And environmental isn't just about emissions, it's about the broader ecology. So I guess that's one thing. And then secondly, and it sounds a bit not all men, so apologies for that, but it is, you know, it's not all farmers. And there are there are hundreds of amazing farmers doing incredible work every day. Many of them doing it really quietly and just quietly getting on with it, not, you know, kind of gobby farmers like me who tell everyone about what they're doing. So I think it's really important to find those people that are doing good things and to champion them, because actually, rather than knocking the aspects of the sector that are not helpful and that are not maybe what we want to see as a future vision of farming, if we can lift up and champion and put on pedestals the people that we really appreciate, that we value, and that we think are doing a good job, that's going to have much better impact than just slamming the people that aren't doing what we would maybe like them to.
I couldn't have summarized that better myself, and I think there's a message in there for food partnerships across the country, and that is to try and establish dialogues with people who doing farming, who produce your food, and are pushing in the right directions. We're not enemies, we're pushing in the same direction. We're allies, and we might not necessarily agree on everything, but we do need to make sure that we work as an alliance. Now, Caroline mentioned support from Norwich, Scotland. It might not always be easy to find the people that you want to connect with and to find the roots of doing that. But I think there is a job to be done in Sustain and other organisations to help find food partnerships, make connections with those farmers. Caroline, you've got your hand up, so you jump in.
The way that we did our workshops was to hold a safe space for anybody, you know, so there was no, we didn't make anybody feel singled out or upset that they weren't following a particular way. And so it was, the sessions were very much open to talk about what people were doing, where they wanted to go, and what were their issues and what were the things that they wanted to do. So it was a space where we had conversations and dialogues rather than saying this is the way. And I think that was really important for farmers to be able to be heard and not judged. So we weren't judging anybody. We were just having conversations and finding out what people wanted and where we could work together, really. So it wasn't like a meeting where you knew what the end was going to be. You know, it was open for conversations, and that's where Nourish actually were really brilliant at holding that space. And they taught me how to do it, because I'm always wanting to think about, well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Because I'm sort of doing project work and project managing. But those dialogues were really important, that they weren't like that, certainly at the beginning. And now what we do is we don't waste time. We listen and we act, and we come back to the next meeting with what's been asked for. So that's how these projects have come out so quickly. I don't know if that helps at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. Before I hand back
can I just come in quickly on that?
Yeah. I was going to give the last word to you, Dan.
Yeah, I think that was excellent. I think that's exactly how farmers need to be taught to engage with. But I also say there's some great opportunities with, you know, the government are going to be incentivizing farmers to work together as clusters, and mainly for landscape-wide change. But if those farmers are sitting around the table in groups, there's a really good opportunity for organizations like you guys to join in that conversation. You know, if people are working together to improve water and soil health, why can't they work together to improve local food systems as well?
Real. Thank you for all of that, to all of you, and for your contributions. Sophia, the meeting is yours again.
No, another big thank you from me and Ren to our wonderful speakers, and putting it so well. And thank you for reminding us that it's good to embrace the complexity, and it's never very good to just focus on one aspect of sustainability. So thank you very much, everyone, for sticking around. We do want to finish on time. So the last 10 minutes, I invite you to don't go just yet, because Fife produced this wonderful film summarizing the Fork to Farm dialogue that happened in the area. And see you at the next campaign's breakfast. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Sphere, mine's not actually letting me share screen, so you might have to do it and see if it works.
There's no sound. I'm not getting any sound. Sophia, I don't have any sound. Yeah.
I'm really sorry about that. I have sound. Let me try again.
It's really quiet. I think we'll just need to get people to follow the link and watch the film. I'll share it in the chat again. But it's really worth watching. It's a brilliant film.
I'm really sorry about that, guys, but use the last 10 minutes that we have up to 11:30. Really watch this film. It's really good. It's very informative, but at the same time, it's beautifully filmed. It brought tears to my eyes the first time I watched it. So please do watch it, and see you next time.